So we're here in the Edison Diner with mayoral candidate Keith Hahn. Could you tell us a little bit, sir, about this spot and why it's important to you as you consider your mayoral campaign?
Being born and raised in Edison and living a couple blocks from here, this is the local diner. My son's favorite chicken fingers here. So when you called and asked for a place in Edison, this was the first place that came to mind.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about your candidacy. So you're the former Democratic chair, you're a retired police officer,
Yes.
and you're running as a Republican. You've also been involved in some very significant events on the ground in your town. And perhaps most significantly in the last couple of years, you were involved in stopping the contract with Suez, the sewer contract with Suez. It's a multi-million-dollar contract. Tell me a little bit about your efforts there.
Yeah, so when the Suez effort came up, really the crux of that, it was being financed by a private equity firm, KKR, with a guaranteed rate of 11% on $800 million. So that's a significant amount of money, and we just didn't think it was fair for the taxpayer to guarantee a big corporate giant like KKR, a hedge fund, 11% on $800 million. You know, the mayor, current mayor Lanky, Mahesh Baghi, and one of the other guys running, he was the special assistant to the mayor at the time. They were intent on pushing this deal through, and everybody said there was nothing you could do about it. So I actually reached out to a bunch of people. I wound up working with Food and Water Watch, which is a very progressive group, and we were able to come up with a citizen-initiated referendum. We had to get 5,000 signatures. We actually passed it with a almost 9-to-1 margin, and it was the first. We're actually the first town in the country for a citizen-passed referendum to ensure that your water is publicly owned and operated. First one in the country.
So the outcome of all that is a publicly owned entity controlling the water here.
So the referendum ensured that our water would be publicly owned and operated. Correct. And it was passed by referendum, so in order to be changed, it has to be changed by referendum.
Understood. And can you tell me a little bit about how a Republican wins in this town? So you have some momentum off of that win, off of that victory in that specific fight, but still, it's a Democratic town. Democrats have controlled the town for decades, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
How do you break through that?
So I think it's just years of consistency, whether it was as Democratic chairman or running as last time. I think my message has been the same. My positions have been the same, and I haven't changed. With all the turmoil and controversy going on right now, I think people are starting to look for somebody that's been a steady constant. You know, although they may not agree with me all the time, they can appreciate the fact that I don't go from left to right. I'm kind of where I am, and I stay there no matter which way the political winds are blowing.
Can you give me an example, or let's say two examples of where you've been a rock as the waves have roiled around you?
Well, being a retired police officer, and I've had it both ways. I was a former PBA president and delegate for 10 years, and then being, when I was the Democratic chairman, the police department has always been a focal point of, you know, whether it's the Sunday Star Ledger or, you know, the local newspaper. You know, that's always been a focal point. And I've always been of the position where leadership has to be held accountable. You know, we keep having incident after incident after incident, yet nobody in a leadership position is ever held accountable. And, you know, that was the same when I was a patrolman, to when I was the Democratic chairman, to now as a candidate for mayor is the second time. I think people in positions have to be held accountable for their job.
Are the Democrats cannibalizing one another in this town, Mr. Hahn?
I think they're causing damage that's going to be irreparable to both sides that I don't think they're going to be able to overcome in November. I think it's getting really bad.
When you look at the past mayors going back to the early part of this century, was there any mayor that did a better job than the others, or did they all have their sulfuric handicaps?
I mean, you go back for the last 20 years. You had, you know, at the end of Spaduro's, I guess it was his third term, when Mayor Choi came in. He was one term. Mayor Rosigliano came in one term. Now Lanky's been 2 terms. It just seems politically, people here are more concerned with their next position or moving up the ladder than they are just running good, efficient government. And I think if you surround yourself with good people and you run good, efficient government, at the end of the day, you let the pieces fall where they may. You know, I just think that's probably the better way to go.
How do you lower taxes in this town and maintain services?
I don't know if you're going to lower them. Everybody's pledging to lower them, but you hear everybody talk about shared services. The town has a $170 million budget. The Board of Education has a $286 million budget. So you got $450 million a year there, where we don't need to share services with other municipalities. We could start right within our own township. If we were to work collectively with the Board of Education, and you have health care, where municipal and teachers have health care, you could work on that. IT, grounds and maintenance. There's a lot of areas there where you could have a shared service contract with the Board of Education, and there's some significant savings that could be had in a lot of those areas.
You touched on it earlier. You're a retired police officer. What about having had that experience gives you an insight that you could use in town hall as mayor?
Well, I think most cops will tell you that the number one trait or characteristic they use every day when they come to work is common sense. So this is municipal government. It's not really complicated stuff. It's common sense. It's having some integrity and backbone to do the right thing. And unfortunately, you may have to tell your friends you don't agree with them, and sometimes. And being a retired cop, you know, you kind of get used to that on a daily basis. So the 3 things I've always brought to work and told newer guys when they came on the job, the 3 characteristics as a cop is common sense, you know, that speaks for itself. Empathy, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes and understand where they're at. And some compassion and understand how they got there. And I always dealt with people like that when I was a cop. I plan on bringing them same characteristics to the mayor's office.
We're having this conversation on day 6 of the Derek Chauvin trial, and just putting this in a larger, it has national repercussions, this case.
Sure.
Do you think that was an improper use of force?
So, you know, obviously it's not something that would happen here in the Northeast. And if you look at all of these incidents around the country, none of them are happening in New Jersey or the Northeast, because our cops are better trained, they have more training, they have more qualifications that they have to go through. So I think a lot of these different scenarios around the country don't pertain to policing in New Jersey. The situation's unfortunate, it shouldn't have happened. But like you said, we're in the 6th day of the trial, so that's the system we live in. I just hope, no matter which way it comes out, you know, I think we could probably, hopefully everybody agrees with the verdict when it comes out, because that's our system.
Based on what you've seen, do you have any sense of whether that was a justified killing or not?
I have to be honest with you, Max. I really haven't followed it too much, and I'm not that familiar with the case to speak on the particulars. Only because I'm running for mayor of Edison. You know, I'm not trying to, you know, you're never going to see me run for governor or president. To me, this is about local issues and local things, and I really don't follow the national issues too much.
Let's get back to Edison then. And could you tell me, you're from this town, went to school in this town,
Yeah.
reared in this town. It's a town that's gone through a lot of flux over the years. But what is it that really identifies at its core the characteristics of someone from Edison, an Edisonian?
So I think, you know, you'll hear a lot of these other mayors say they have the most diverse town in the state and everything, but Edison here really is the most diverse town in the state. When you have kids in high school, and it's, you know, ethnically as well as socioeconomically. You'll have kids in J.P. Stevens High School whose parents are on food stamps sitting next to a kid whose parents make $5 million a year. Forget race or nationality or any of that. Where do you have that socioeconomic diversity anywhere in the state? You go to Jersey City, it may be more diverse ethnically, but the kid whose parents make $5 million a year in Jersey City, they're going to private school. They're not sitting in the public school next to the kid who's on welfare or food stamps. And Edison's always been a town, a blue-collar town like that, where people learn how to deal with one another, and a lot of successful people who come up and, grew up here, were educated here, and went on to be very successful in places. And I think no matter who you talk to, you go around the state, all roads lead back to Edison in some way, shape, or form. Whether you're down in the State House and somebody worked there, or you go on vacation to another state, you always run into somebody who has roots or trace back to Edison.
Not far from here is another diner, the Skylark Diner.
Yes.
And that has some significance to you because in this campaign cycle, you were offered a bribe there. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Raj Pandya, whose son was running for Board of Ed at the time, he offered me $10,000 cash in an envelope, in a white paper envelope, in exchange for support. I obviously gave the money back to him immediately and didn't take it, but that was the first time that that's ever happened. But it also happened, I only retired from the police job in July. So I don't know if that's a common thing around here, but it's the first time it ever happened to me.
What's the status of that investigation now? Any idea?
I brought it up at a recent planning board meeting, and they told me it wasn't the proper forum not to bring it up there. I inquired with the township attorney and the mayor, and as far as I know, it's not being pursued whatsoever.
Why is that?
I did contact law enforcement immediately after it happened, and I'm not familiar or aware of the status of the law enforcement investigation.
How has COVID impacted you, and what might be done better from an executive leadership standpoint to ensure safety in this town? Do you believe that schools can reopen at this stage? I know that's not the specific purview of the mayor,
Yeah.
but what role might the mayor play in terms of creating an overall improvement in the physical and mental health of the people here?
So here in Edison, we have a severe overcrowding issue in our schools, and this relates to COVID. And although it's not the mayor's purview, the Board of Education, the overcrowding issue is not going to be resolved just by the Board of Education and the superintendent. You need the mayor, the council, the superintendent, and the Board of Ed to work collectively to solve these problems. You can't have, we have 30, some classes over 30 kids in a classroom. You can't, and that number is going up every year. We brought it up during the last election about overcrowding, and not a single thing's been done since then. So you can't, in this day and age, be having 30, 35, 40 kids in a classroom without a plan to address it. And I think you need to get both sides together. They all have to drop their swords and work together to solve these problems. And I think the funding mechanism comes from what we talked about. If you are working together, you could share services, you take that cost savings, and you could address some of the problems. To me, it's just common sense stuff.
We're going to do a number of these over the
Sure.
coming weeks and months. This is going to be a long campaign. But is there anything today that you'd like to add to what we've discussed?
No, I think we've covered a pretty good range of topics. Try not to talk too long, but yeah, I look forward to doing it again.
Me too, Keith. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
time. It's good to
Appreciate
be
it.
in Edison.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you for coming.